Hey everybody, Riot Mort here with the patch 11.5 rundown. A little different this week. We kicked Static out. He's just not here today, and instead I'm joined by Riot Kent. So Kent, how's it going?
Hey everyone. My name is Riot Kent. I work on the live team with Static. And yeah, you might have seen me in one of the previous patch, one
Postmortems.
of, yeah, postmortems. But yeah, I'm back.
Nice. So what's interesting about this patch is I think Static was mostly focused on some of the more longer term projects we've got going, which kind of left you to take ownership on this patch. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. So this is a patch where I had more of a hand in working on it. Jbuck still, or Static still obviously oversaw, and Mort too, the work that was being done, but a lot of the actual work was done on my end.
Cool. That's got to be pretty exciting. So
Yeah.
generally, 11.4 has ended up in, I think I would call it a good but perception balance. Like we're struggling with this perception versus reality thing because if you look at our data and you look at some of the emerging comps and you look past the like top two players on each server, the meta actually looks pretty good post B patch. Seeing a lot of comps, a lot of emerging things like, but there's definitely some perception issues where people believe the meta is not as diverse as it is. Does that sound about right from your understanding?
Yeah. From our end, we're actually seeing an extremely healthy meta. And that our diversity metrics are kind of really high. There's definitely a perception, though. It's like, because we nerfed these other forecasts, but we didn't touch Tryndamere. Tryndamere must be OP. And it's not really showing up that way. And also, we're just seeing him, like, he's performing well in a lot of the games that I watch, or the match histories that I go through. He's performing well, but he's not necessarily like broken or even really OP. He's not like the best forecast that's in the game right now. So it's definitely like a mismatch between perception and reality, and it's something that we're constantly struggle with. So
Gotcha. Now, 11.5, because we just came off a very large patch, probably our last big shakeup of patch of the entire set. 11.5 has ended up pretty small. Is that right?
yeah, so the goal, we had a couple goals with this patch. We didn't want to shake things up too much. We're coming off of a large patch, and the meta is like we're seeing it start to develop more and more, and it's developing in a way that's pretty diverse. So we didn't want to shake things up too much. We just wanted to fix a couple problems that were currently in the game.
Okay, cool. Well, we can talk more about that. Let's jump into our first slide. So this one actually had very little to do with you. This was Giovanni's project.
Mm-hmm.
And what's crazy is, before I even break into it, it's a lot of text for something that right now basically changes nothing. You will almost see zero change because of this change, but let me explain. Basically, we are working towards a world where our debuffs are clear and can have different levels and maybe even names and identifiers. And each debuff has three levels of power. So I'm going to make up, let's call it Armor Shred. There's Armor Shred 1, Armor Shred 2, and Armor Shred 3. Armor Shred 3 being the most powerful. And so what we've done is we've taken all of our debuffs and made sure that the way it works is always take the most powerful version. So, for example, let's say you had a 1-star Vi and a 3-star Vi who does 40, which Armor Shred 1 and Armor Shred 3. You can see kind of like how this graph works, where which debuff will take effect. And again, this isn't particularly new, and a lot of our things were already doing this, but now it's more universal across all of our debuffs. So, for example, in the future, we'll be able to do like attack speed slow 25%, 50%, 75%, instead of like right now where it's literally 50 or you can't use the debuff. And so that's the long term goal. But again, short term, you're basically not going to see any change. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, definitely something that's like helpful internally for us, as it gives us more balance levers. Like you mentioned, the attack speed slow thing, more ways for us to be able to adjust and balance things in the game.
Yep. So again, immediate effect, very little here. Long term effects, hopefully very good as we develop more of our tooltips and debuffs and things like that. So, okay, now for the stuff you care about. All right, so Kent, you and I have this meme where you hate Jana for some reason, and every time you have nerfed Jana, I think 3 times already, and every time you do it, I'm like, Kent, why? Why are you nerfing Jana? So Kent, why are you nerfing Jana?
The truth is, I should have just nerfed her once really hard, and then we would not have this meme at all. But it just Jana is so good. I play her every game that I can get her. Like if I get it chosen enlightened or chosen mystic Jana, it's like, oh my god, yes, this is gonna be a good game.
Now to be clear, you're not basing this just off your performance. I would hope.
No. Yeah. It's like personally, I don't hate Jana. I guess that's the point I'm trying to make. I don't hate her. I actually really like her. But from the data, she's overperforming, and she has topped the 2 cost charts, and just overall just unit charts, for like she's performed really well on the unit charts for a long time. And so we've been making adjustments to like bring her down in different ways, and just like, with the enlightened change with set 4.5, it came new problems with her mana pool, so we had to adjust that. And so we're getting to like a sweet spot of, she's good, but she's not like OP. And I think with this change, it looks like a very small nerf, but it's 3 targets at 2 stars rather than two targets at 2 stars. So like, yeah, it is a bigger change than it looks. It's not just 25, but it's about 10% nerf to Jana, and seems very reasonable given the data that we have and the trends that we've seen from her in the past.
Yeah, I think the reality is Jana has this perception because she's never the one carrying and dealing damage. So a lot of players, especially as you get lower in the elo chain, don't recognize that she's actually the reason why you just got your butt kicked by a lot. So
yeah, facing her also it's kind of when she is broken, it's pretty frustrating to face her because you fight a board with a chosen Jana with blue buff or something, and then you take 5 units of damage, and you're just like, oh no, that sucks. So we want to get her to a sweet spot where it's also less frustrating to play against.
Okay, so TLDR, Kent hates Jana. Got it.
Not at all.
All right, Lulu. I think this is a pretty easy to explain change, but slight buff for Lulu. Why don't you explain this one?
Lulu's been underperforming. I think, Elderwood has struggled a little bit. Lulu has definitely struggled. And so this is a change that, gives her cast cadence a little bit, buffs her cast cadence a little bit, but also that like 5 mana difference there at the starting mana, kind of encourages you to like, oh, if you have a Chalice or you have a Shojin, like you can put a tier on her, and it actually cuts off 2 autos rather than 1.
Yeah, like we talked about this in the patch post-mortem, but like Elderwood, the trait is finally balanced, but some of the units are underperforming. And so now we can buff some of the units. So
yep.
Cool. All right, why don't you talk about Vigor a little bit?
Yeah. So Vigor is kind of in a similar boat to Lulu. Elderwood is struggling a little bit. The units in it are not performing very well. And so Vigor is one that was a target for buffs. We've made a lot of changes to Vigor over the course of set 4, whether it's like the spell damage on kill, and we nerf the spell damage, we change his mana. And we're at a point where I think it makes more sense like these numbers are back to where Vigor used to be. And I think it makes more sense now that we've nerfed both his mana and his like spell damage on kill. Yep. Which makes him, not get into a pattern of like he just heals for all of his health every time he kills something and get into a very high AP state too easily. It's like if you get him now, you can still like get him early now. You can still have him ramp up, and he can still be a very good unit. But we're also yeah.
So I think these 2 things will help Elderwood. But just to ask the obvious question, do we have any concerns with Mage getting these 2 buffs?
So with Mage, these 2 buffs specifically, I don't think changes much on the Mage front. I think it's more like it gives you more options within Mages to how you want to build the comp around your core Mages and which Mages are your core Mages. So like it gives you more options. You can carry Vigor now instead of carrying it just ASOL or 3-star TF, or Brand.
Cool. Yep. Okay. On to the next slide. Forecasts. So Aurelion Soul, this change seems weird, and as we note here, it is related to the Trap Claw interaction. The Trap Claw interaction, just to spoil it, basically says the projectile fires faster, so it'll stun quicker. So why don't you explain what this does?
Yeah, so Trap Claw was not stunning Asol between his first and second casts. So Asol would be able to breathe fire on your entire team and then hit a Trap Claw unit, but the Trap Claw didn't counter him, so he would be able to breathe his second time and do the empowered breath. that's something that we wanted to change and make sure that it does properly counter. And part of that change was slowing his cast time just a tiny little bit at 0.1, which it's not really going to be noticeable at all. We want to do it in a way that didn't nerf Mage Asol in a significant way. And this is one that, like, we moving by 0.1 is not something that's a noticeable nerf. But it was necessary in order to get the interaction to work properly.
Cool. Yeah, I'm kind of looking forward to this. Should add some value to Trap Claw as a counter option. So.
Yeah, and by the way, Trap Claw, the new speed of Trap Claw looks super cool. So.
All right, then Morgana, this isn't even really a change, other than we finally took the Magic Shred off her tooltip that has literally never been there since Festival of Beasts, because somebody finally stopped missing Lokelock. So at least this is done, and the tooltip is fixed, so huzzah.
Who is that somebody?
Yeah, no idea. No idea. All right, so as you see so far, not a lot of changes. We have Jana, Lulu, Vigor, and some adjustments. I think the next slide is the only really big stuff here. So Samira, this is a change I think has been a long time coming. I wish it had been in 2 patches ago, but I'm glad it got its proper testing. Is this a buff? Is this a nerf? What is this?
So this is this one, Yone and Olaf, which shipped in 11.4b, are all part of one of our goals of, like, detaching that perfect item from the unit. It's not like, but not in a way that like kills the build. It's just kind of like reducing the ceiling of having that perfect build and increasing the floor of not having that perfect build, so that you feel okay building other items if you don't hit that perfect item for your carry. And for Samira, that was Deathblade. She has insane AD scaling. And so by shifting some of the power from her AD scaling into a base damage per shot, it reduces the need for like just raw AD on her. You can build other items, Giant Slayer, etc. And overall, this is a slight buff to base Samira and a nerf to Deathblade Samira, which should close the gap a little bit.
Perfect. Yeah, I'm really glad to see that, because I was a little tired of Deathblade Samira being like, you win the game, and non-Deathblade Samira being like, why do you exist?
Yeah.
So
hopefully we'll get her in a much better spot. And so the spell damage 15 just is like, to be clear, it's 15 per shot, and in her ult, she fires a total of 18 shots.
Yeah, this isn't going to make you want to run triple death cap Samira or anything like that. So,
but it works. It's AP on her is actually decent, so it's an okay build.
Decent, but not primary. Don't think we're saying it's best in slot or anything like that.
Right.
All right, Swain gets a slight buff, but this is actually related to the debuff thing we were talking about, and you'll see on the next slide with items that basically the burn debuff, which I'm going to call burn for now, very original name, has 2 levels, at least right now in the game, 20% and 30%. And so again, to try to unify that, Swain gets to be the 30% level, which is a slight buff to his burn. Cool.
Yep.
And then the Yone change, I am excited as hell for this change. I mentioned this in the patch postmortem. I think Yone with blue buff is finally in a good spot. I think Yone without blue buff is still too weak. This is going to make blue buff a lot less necessary. Still good, but a lot less necessary. And now some 3-item Yones that aren't blue buff might even be stronger. And so that's really cool to see. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, for sure. He was just taking too long to deal his damage after he ulted, and so by reducing that cast the mana by 1, he gets more casts off. But it doesn't make blue buff useless on him, even though you kind of lose that like 10 mana value. He can like dash, and then he doesn't have to walk up to the next unit. He can just dash to that next unit. So blue buff is still good on him. It's just not as game changing as it was before.
Yeah, that's what I'm really excited about. It's like, you'll still maybe want blue buff, but now maybe you'll also put on like a death cap or another gunblade or a hodge, and like there's options here. So really excited for that.
Yeah, change.
Cool.
Yeah.
All right, on to items. We talked about this in the patch postmortem. Deathblade's been a little bit too much of a slam since its base damage was so damn high. The way I phrased it there was, why would you ever put an Infinity Edge on somebody when you can put a Deathblade? Unless you're an assassin. So this makes that a little less true, which I think is good.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Morellonomicon, just like Swain, basically gets burn 2 instead of burn 1. So burn 2 is 30% now. So Morellonomicon is actually a bigger burn than Sunfire. And this is a Morello buff, which does mean like Morgana gets buffed, Kennen could get buffed. So maybe some things to keep an eye on there, but it's also only 5% over. It's a very small buff, so cool.
Yep.
All right, Static Shiv. This is one I'm going to come back to you because this barely feels worth the patch note. It's like 5 extra damage. What's going on here?
It's 10% extra damage. This was Static's change, and it's his item too. But he didn't want to swing too far on it and make the item take over in any way. The item still has its like utility uses and has its like margin. Use it for damage in some comps that have very high attack speed scaling. And so, just a 10% buff in damage should help it find more of a place in the meta, hopefully. If not, we will go back and think about ways to make the item more interesting.
Okay. Sunfire gets a bit of a nerf. Again, with this debuff system, it's now gets burn 1, the base level, which is 20%. But to make up for that fact, because we didn't want to actually nerf the item, we undid the cadence nerf from the last patch. So it's back to every 2 seconds, but it's just a slightly weaker burn. So
yep.
And then Trap Claw, as we mentioned, it goes faster now. And so it can actually stun mages and things like that. Cool. All right, and then we have the bug fixes. I'm just going to read these pretty quick. Jarvan 4 now works with Mage Cap better. Sweet. Multiple Callistas no longer fail to execute a target if the Callista that landed the first spear dies. Sounds like a bad bug. Not that many people were running 2-star Callista, but...
Yeah, not that many people were running multiple Callistas. I think there was one troll player that ran a bunch of, like 9 Callistas, 8 Callistas on every board, but yeah.
Nice. Fixed a bug where Galio would sometimes not land on the largest cluster. Why don't you explain this one? Because I know you're the one who fixed this.
Yeah. So this one was kind of interesting. So like Aatrox would pull 2 units, and Galio was very smart in a certain way where he would determine, okay, well, they're being pulled, so those 2 units are part of this like large cluster that I'm going to land on. But then he jumps before the Aatrox animation finishes and decides, I'm going to land where that unit currently is. And that unit hasn't been pulled yet, so he would land where that unit used to be, because as he lands, that unit flies away. And so it created some like rough situations where it's like, well, why did my Galio miss? He's so dumb. But he was actually just being too smart. So we fixed it so that he is double smart now. He'll determine that unit will move to this new location, and he'll land on the new location, therefore hitting the entire cluster.
Sweet. And yeah, props to Reddit, because this was one where a Reddit bug report definitely helped us find this. So that was good.
Yeah.
Fixed a bug where Tryndamere Spinning Slash could benefit from the basic damage attack bonus. It's interesting because this could be considered a buff or a nerf, depending on how you look at it. Because what'll happen is now his spin will never get amplified by his amp, which means you'll never get like a really powerful spin that like chews through 4 people. But it does mean you're losing actually, I guess it's just a nerf, isn't it? I think it's a nerf.
It's just a nerf because the odds that he would get 3 attacks off consecutively without spinning again by taking damage or something like that was not as was a little bit more rare. So yeah, it is a nerf, especially because his spin would go through multiple targets.
Yeah. What's interesting is I've been keeping an eye on this ever since we noticed this bug, and it happens a lot more than you'd expect due to CC. Like he'll spin, get CC, take some damage, and then spin again. So yeah, I think this will generally end up being a nerf. Fixed a bug where Runon's Hurricane was consuming a stack of Tryndamere Spinning Slash. This is just a nerf to Hurricane Tryndamere. Not that a ton of people were running that, but that is a nerf to Hurricane Tryndamere. And then we fixed Chonk's audio. Sweet. Don't know why we bugged it, but it's fixed. Woohoo!
Yep.
So
it's very important. The most important point of the whole thing.
Yeah. So generally a small patch, and I think the question a lot of players are going to ask is, why didn't you nerf X? Why didn't you nerf Sivir? Why didn't you nerf Aatrox and Sejuani? Why didn't you nerf Samira? Any thoughts on any of sort of like the obvious, or Kale? The Kale's another one. Like, any thoughts on sort of those like obvious loud complaint champions?
Yeah. So a lot of the forecasts I think are actually in a pretty good spot right now, according to like meta diversity and also just unit data. Kale is one that's like I think in a good spot, and we should try to aim for other forecasts being around that. And there are some like outliers that are just slightly too high that we will keep an eye on and continue to address. But getting like most recent data back, it's like Tryndamere, for example, it's like he is performing really well, but not to like broken levels. And also there are some levels of him being carried by Olaf, and so like being able to break that down and see where's the core problem, what do we need to address? Is it Slayers, is it Tryndamere? And it's not at a level where it's like we need to urgently nerf it to a level that is much weaker than it currently is at. As far as like Sivir, Sivir's performing well. I think partially is related to the strength of Last Whisper right now, which is also related to the strength of like deep Vanguards, and it's not necessarily just Sejuani and Aatrox, because 2 Vanguards is good but not great. But like for example, if you see like 6 Vanguards, it's actually doing really well, or like 8 Vanguards. And so these are problems that like it's not just about nerfing that one obvious outlier. It's about like figuring out what's the core problem that we need to do a bigger change to address it.
Yeah, we talked about this in the patch post-mortem, that like just nerf Olaf would have actually done pretty bad things to the game. Nerfing Hurricane Olaf did very good things to the game. So finding that correct lever to pull is part of the challenge.
Yep.
Cool. All right, so yeah, like I said, smaller patch. And if you didn't watch the post-mortem, I'll also explain that patches are probably going to stay pretty small from here on out. We'll definitely address balance outliers and things like that, but you're probably done seeing any of the big system reworks or major trait redos or things like that, because we're getting into the point where the competitive season is starting to wrap up and we're late into the set's life. It's time to kind of wind down, let the competitive players play and wrap it up. And we're only 4 patches away from set 5 on PBE. So yeah, because this is 11.5, 11.6, 11.7, and then 11.8 is the last patch of Fates, and set 5 will be on PBE, so we're getting kind of close to the end here. So cool.
Exciting stuff.
Yeah. Anything you want to say to wrap this up, Kent?
Yeah, I mean, hope the patch that makes more things viable for this patch. Try out Trap Claw, it's gonna be fun. But yeah, hopefully it lands really well and it's a lot of fun. I'm excited to play it.
Cool. All right, well, that's gonna do it for us for this time. As always, on behalf of the whole team, thank you for playing. Yeah, that'll do it. So until next time, take it easy.